Hey everybody, I'm Natasha Kirchuk, and thanks for joining us for ILTV's weekly program, One-on-One with Alan Dershowitz. We want to give you, our viewers, a chance to have your questions answered by Professor Dershowitz, one of America's greatest legal minds. He's a leading expert on criminal and constitutional law, civil liberties, and the Arab-Israeli conflict. Today we have a special edition of the show where we recapture the finest moments and commentary, bringing you the best of One-on-One with Alan Dershowitz. All right, so we are going to begin with perhaps the most scary news of the year, at least for the United States. The director of the CIA has just announced that he is concerned that North Korea could hit the United States with a missile in just a handful of months, meaning the recent panic that ensued in Hawaii following a false alarm could actually happen in the continental United States. Professor Dershowitz, how worried should we be?
Well, we should be much more worried that this will be the same announcement that's going to be made 10 years from now regarding Iran. We have limited options when it comes to North Korea. We have tremendously variable options when it comes to Iran. And we have to stop thinking only about tomorrow and think about the day after tomorrow and next week. And we just cannot allow Iran to become the next North Korea, because remember that North Korea does not have hegemonic ambitions. They don't want to take over Japan. They don't want to take over China. Whereas Iran has hegemonic ambitions and also the stated ambition to destroy the nation state of the Jewish people, which they consider a one-bomb state. So all the focus should be on Iran, not on North Korea. North Korea can be easily destroyed with one simple attack if it became necessary. I'm talking about its nuclear capacity. It would, of course, have great impact on South Korea and its neighbors, but it, in the end, does not pose a strategic threat to the United States, whereas Iran poses a major strategic threat if it is allowed to develop nuclear weapons. So whenever I hear about Korea, I think Iran.
Now, Professor Dershowitz, we're going to get to Iran more in depth after this, but what do you believe needs to be done right now regarding North Korea more specifically?
Well, the United States has to be prepared to take military action, if necessary, to knock out its nuclear capacity. It also has to have a strong deterrence. In his State of the Union message, the president talked about increasing the United States nuclear capacity to include, I suspect, tactical nuclear weapons. Every other option has to be considered, including changing American law with regard to assassination. If the leadership of the North Korean country can be terminated without a massive attack on the entire country, that would be an option to be preferred over some kind of a massive attack. I don't think it's enough to simply contain North Korea and to count on deterrence, though that may be the option in the end that will be pursued. These are very, very difficult strategic decisions that have to be thoughtfully considered. And the tragedy is that we allowed ourselves, the United States, to get into the situation where North Korea is now making us, presenting us with these horrible choices. We have to make sure that never does Iran present us with those horrible choices. And we're a step closer to that than we were after the deal that the United States signed with Iran several years ago.
I understand that you've actually just completed yet another book, this time focusing on making the case against the BDS movement. Now, after writing nearly 40 books, what prompted you to write this book, and what are your main messages?
Well, I wrote the case against BDS really as a primer for college students who are facing BDS every day on university campuses. Just like I written the book, The Case for Israel, almost 20 years ago, to provide ammunition for students on campus and around the country to be able to fight against the case against Israel. Right now, BDS is very prominent on university campuses, and students keep calling me and asking me for ammunition to use. They know that I debated at the Oxford Union and won. I debated against Cornel West in Dallas and won, and that they want to hear the arguments that I've accumulated over the last 10 or 15 years against BDS. So the book starts with the history of BDS, with the players, and it basically proves what I argue in the subtitle, namely why singling out Israel for boycott is both anti-Semitic and anti-peace. And the most important part of it it really is anti-peace. It makes the prospects for peace far more difficult. And so my goal in writing the book is to make available copies, free or at very, very small expense, to college students all over the country. I did the same thing with Case for Israel. I'm waiving all my royalties in order to bring the price down. And I've gotten already some volunteers, people who went to colleges years ago, and they're going to buy, 100 copies at a discounted price and provide them to the Hillels or Chabads or other pro-Israel organizations on campus so that they can be distributed to the students, and the students will be able to have an easily accessible reference book to make the case against the BDS in every form that it's being made on university campuses.
Well, this is the perfect way to segue into our guests who are visiting us today. Joining us in the studio are two young activists who have also dedicated themselves to fighting against BDS. Chen Mazig is an energetic young Israeli of Iraqi descent who served in the Israeli army as a coordination officer, where he helped the IDF with solving problems with the Palestinians in the occupied territories. For the last 8 years, he has worked on college campuses around the world fighting BDS, and a year ago, he was actually attacked by a mob at the University College London while working. Take a look at this.
It's a familiar scene, unfortunately. I've experienced it myself at universities. Look, if you can't answer arguments, you scream, you yell, you threaten, you try to shut down the opponent. We win when we have an opportunity to present both sides of the issues. They try to win by simply shutting down the anti-BDS side and by threatening violence and by creating, to use the metaphor that is used on campuses today, unsafe spaces for pro-Israel advocates.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like him to tell us a little bit about what happened on that day.
It was disturbing. Just to seeing this video again is disturbing. I've been a speaker. I've been harassed on college campuses many times because of my story. I'm talking about my family coming from Iraq and North Africa, and then how I was almost killed during the Second Intifada, how I served as an openly gay commander in the humanitarian unit of the Israeli army, coordinating with the Palestinians to promote peace. And I think this story is something that they don't want to hear on college campuses. And oftentimes I'm harassed, I'm attacked. And this case in UCL was very, it was shocking to see 200 people trying to break through windows, trying to break through doors just to shut me down. This event was so terrible that the president of the university invited me to come back. And in January 2018, I returned to UCL. And I mean, the fact that there was 5 police cars and hundreds of policemen, that I felt that this, like, securing the venue pushed out the protesters. About 100 protesters came out this time.
Mm-hmm. You're the nightmare of the BDS group, because you are not an Ashkenazi Jew. You have experienced suffering at the hands of Arabs. Your family has. Yeah. You're openly gay, so you're guilty of pink washing. You know what pink washing is? Yeah. Pink washing is the accusation that Israel is supportive of gay, transgender, and lesbian rights only to cover what they do to Palestinians. And you're an eyewitness to Israel not being an apartheid country and being an openly democratic country, and they need to shut you down, because if you get to speak and present your case, it destroys their case. So kol hakavod, keep doing it. And if you need any legal assistance in what you're doing, I'll give you put my name on speed dial.
Well, and this is your time to ask a question, because I know you did want to ask the professor for some advice, right?
Yeah, I've been following Professor Dershowitz, and I've read every book he wrote. Not the BDS one yet. I'm looking forward for that. But I've been a fan and really looking up to you. And I want to know, what is your advice for a speaker like me that I was harassed in University of Illinois a few months ago when they mocked my story of coming out, mocked me, started laughing at me when I told about my family being oppressed in Iraq and North Africa. Sharing my story was for them unbearable, and and I keep on going through that, and I feel like there should be some legal implication for attacks like this on college campuses in the US and in Europe. I've experienced it almost everywhere.
There should be, but let me tell you how bad it's gotten. When the University of California at Irvine invited Michael Oren to speak, he was then the Israeli ambassador to the United States, Students for Justice for Palestine decided to shut him down. Very clearly, they have it on tape. Shut him down, don't let him speak. And every time he got up to speak, they shouted hysterically, they wouldn't stop, and 7 or so of them were arrested. The American Civil Liberties Union, which is supposed to defend free speech of speakers, came out on the side of those who stopped the speaker from speaking. That's how bad it's become. You get arrested for trying to exercise your freedom of speech. It has to stop. And we need to put together stories like yours and bring legal actions in the courts, in the administrative agencies, cutting off financial federal aid to universities that don't protect speakers like you. You have the right to speak. Your audience has the right to hear you. The protesters can boo episodically if you say something and they disagree with it, or they can hold up a sign, but they cannot stop you from speaking. And the American Civil Liberties Union, which I was on the national board of for years, is on the wrong side of this issue. It is no longer a civil liberties organization. It has turned into a left-wing political anti-Israel organization, at least some parts of it, in some parts of the United States. And we have to turn that around. And you can be very helpful, and we should work together and coordinate when you come to the United States to speak, to make sure that you have legal monitors with you, you have people who are supportive of the right to free speech, and we're on your side, and we're going to protect you and defend you and protect the right of people to listen to your very, very important message.
The Israeli Interior Minister Aryeh Deri has just said that despite statements from the president of Rwanda, Israel has reached an agreement with a third-party country in Africa to deport and accept asylum seekers even against their will and with force. What could stop this? And I understand that there's some people in the room here who don't necessarily want to stop this, right? Would you like to begin?
Well, it pains me to agree with Derry on anything because I have a very major problem with the personality. But I think that the question is not if Rwanda is willing or not willing. In the final analysis, we are not responsible for anybody who infiltrated into Israel. And we've seen in Europe the catastrophic consequences of wanting to feel good about ourselves and paying in terms of irresponsibility for next generations. I want people who came from Africa to Israel to write to their relatives and their friends in Africa, don't come here, because otherwise Israel will be swamped. And I think it's a very good idea that we made it very difficult for people who are mostly not asylum seekers. They're mostly people who want to improve their lot in life, and they basically want to come and work in Israel. And I can understand their need, but I'm not willing to do it. I mean, look what happened to Europe just after 2015. The inevitable consequence of accepting more than 1 million people into Germany was that in Europe today, right-wing parties are rising, even fascist elements are coming closer to government, and Europe is changing in a very negative way. We must do it very, very carefully, and the question if we can secure the lives of people who will get out of Israel, I think is beyond what our responsibility demands.
Professor Dershowitz?
Well, my friend Erwin Cutler has been in Israel for the past couple of weeks seeking a resolution of this terrible, terrible problem. He has proposed the appointment of Natan Sharansky kind of to try to work out a humanitarian resolution. Look, everybody agrees that under international law, under traditional practices, Israel doesn't have to accept people who are here illegally, but we're talking about many of them are children. Some of them are working very hard. They've learned to speak Hebrew. I don't think there should be a mass deportation or a mass solution. I think Israel should try as best as possible to come up with individualized solutions that fit the needs of both Israel and individuals within the group. Some should be allowed to stay who have jobs, who've proven their ability to contribute to Israeli society. Those who have young children perhaps should be given special deference. Those who have to go back to countries where there are great political crises and upheavals going on, and Israel should look to the future. I'm not in favor of Trump's building a wall between us and Mexico, nor am I in favor of brutal ways of stopping people from coming over the way some countries have done, sinking boats. Look, what happened with Israel when boats were sunk by the British and by others when people were trying to get to Israel. I just think that Israel's moral standing in the world has to be taken into consideration. And appointing Natan Sharansky kind of as an overseer, he's a man of great integrity and human rights history, to resolve this issue in a humanitarian way, which maintains Israel's moral standing in the world, shows a little bit of Rahmanut, Rahmanis, as my grandmother would say, and solves the problem without only focusing on the immediate issue of applying the rule of law. I think when the Torah says tzedek, tzedek tirdof, it understands there are two kinds of justice: the rigid justice of the law and the justice that includes a sense of compassion, a sense of Jewish history, and a sense of trying to resolve this in a way that restores or maintains or even increases Israel's moral standing in the world. I agree that we should not allow Israel to become Europe with massive immigration, but we're talking now about several tens of thousands of people, and that's a different number and requires making sure that the numbers don't increase in the future. But I think taking care of the current issue requires a balance of compassion and justice.
I agree very strongly that the combination of Natan Sharansky and Irvin Kotler is an excellent combination of people who can work out a reasonable approach. And also the Israelis have said, the Israeli government has said officially that people who came here as very young children or people with children will not be deported, at least not at this stage. So I think that a combination of showing some Rahmanis to a very limited number and making very, very clear that it will not apply in the future, and getting out of Israel the people who just came here to work and are single and very young and can work in other places and so on, such a combination can work, provided we realize that this will not be a precedent for anything in the future, and being very, very strict from this point on.
We headed over to Amos Yadlin's annual conference of the Israel Institute for Strategic Studies recently, where top experts discussed the world's most pressing security concerns, and as you might imagine, Iran was at the top of the list.
Hi, Alan. I'm here at the INSS annual conference where I've been talking about Iran. President Trump came into office determined to take on Tehran, and in October he outlined a broad-based strategy for dealing with the many challenges posed by Iranian policies across the region. However, to date we've seen very limited results from that strategy. And the question that looms at this point in time is how the United States should and can respond to the issue of Iran if the president cannot, in fact, achieve the nix-it-or-fix-it strategy that he outlined in October. If the United States walks away from the deal without having achieved bipartisan legislation that actually supplements the deal, what will ensue in terms of America's interests? And if we cannot, as the president demanded, achieve a supplemental agreement with the Europeans to address some of the challenges of Iran's nuclear program that were not included in the original deal, how will, in fact, the United States manage the concerns about Iran's regional ambitions, its nuclear and missile programs, without broader cooperation from Europe?
It's a great question, Suzanne. And I think there is both a simple answer and a very complex answer. Let me start with the simple answer. The Iran deal, as I'm sure you know, includes a prologue. And the prologue says twice, Iran reaffirms that it will never, under any circumstances, seek to acquire or develop nuclear weapons. Iran says it's not bound by that. It's just in the prologue. But it's a promise. Iran reaffirmed. And I think the President of the United States should announce that it is American policy to hold Iran to that promise, that the United States policy is that Iran will never, ever, under any circumstances, seek to acquire or develop nuclear weapons. And Congress should then pass an authorization giving the president the authority to implement that by any means necessary, including military means. And so it becomes clear to Iran that the United States will not allow it to seek to acquire or develop nuclear weapons, even if they disguise it as civilian use, as they will certainly try to do once the deal is over. Tom Friedman, who's often very critical of Israel, agrees with me with that assessment, and we both think, and others think, that the president, by making that announcement, could increase the deterrent impact on Iran in not seeking to develop nuclear weapons. As I said, that's simple. The harder point is to see if we can get Congress on board. Congress, of course, overwhelmingly opposed the Iran deal. The American people overwhelmingly opposed the Iran deal. Even many in the White House staff under Obama opposed the Iran deal. The Iran deal is a terrible deal in that it has a sunset provision. It's good that it postpones the spinning of centrifuges for 8 or 10 years. That's the red light, but then the red light turns to yellow and very quickly to green. And so we have to start thinking now about how to prevent Iran from becoming another North Korea, because Iran would be 10 times more dangerous than North Korea because of its hegemonic interests in the region. North Korea is just trying to preserve itself, whereas Iran wants to take over the Gulf, wants to take over the Shia crescent that extends from Iran through northern Iraq, through Syria, through Lebanon, and then even enters into the Sunni areas of Gaza. So steps have to be taken to stop that now. That's independent of the deal itself. And I think the United States has to get tougher. And I think that anybody who cares about peace should care about making sure that Iran never develops nuclear weapons. Look, Israel will never allow Iran to develop nuclear weapons, no matter who the prime minister of Israel is. If they get intelligence that Iran is on the verge of developing and being able to deploy nuclear weapons, Israel will be forced. It will have no choice but to take whatever military action it can to prevent that from happening. It would be much better to prevent that, to not create the need for Israel to take unilateral military action. And the United States under the Trump administration could do a great deal in that direction. Tearing up the deal is not really an option. Enforcing the prologue to the deal is an option.
That wraps up this edition of One-on-One with Alan Dershowitz. If you'd like Professor Dershowitz to answer your questions, go to ILTV.tv or our Facebook page and submit them. We'll see you again next week.